Hi, my name is Jay. I'm here to talk to you about the Unity network, specifically the problems that we were trying to solve. So the purpose of the Unity network is to network all peoples and social movements and to help solve the greatest problems of the 21st century. So it's pretty simple, but for some people we want to go into a lot more depth of what the problems are so you can understand what exactly we're trying to solve. So in this video we're basically just going to we're going to go into some depth, but we're going to glance over a lot of the various problems in global crises and regional crises in the world. And I want to stress that we're not trying to go over all of them because that would be impossible. We're going to try to stick to some of the main 5 that we're going to target. And it's also important to note that part of our goal is bringing and introducing and explaining these crises and problems in a way that is very clear, that is not fear-based, in a way that allows individuals to be empowered to decide for themselves what the problems are and how potentially the solutions could evolve. And of course, from there, we really want to ensure, that people understand that there are solutions to these problems. We don't want to delve into the problems, and actually find solutions. And many times solutions don't necessarily have anything to do with the problems themselves. So let's just jump in here, and we'll go and kind of just discuss the top 5 crises here. So first we have economic destabilization from technological unemployment and wealth stratification. That one's pretty self-explanatory. We have climate destabilization from greenhouse gas emissions and other particulate pollution. That one's pretty straightforward. We have destruction and pollution of 70% of the terrestrial ecosystems and 30% of the ocean ecosystems, if not more. It's probably more like 50 or 70%. With mass species die-offs in the range of 10,000 extinct species per year. Probably more than that. Also, we have dysfunctional governments that are too slow, or are slow and corrupt for the needs of the 21st century people. So that is also a major roadblock to improving our situation. And lastly, for these top 5, we have the basic access to food, water, healthcare, education, income, jobs, and other life necessities on a basic level. So, these are just some of the many problems and crises that we are trying to bring light to. But just to kind of give a cute little video that I worked on a while ago, you can see this in a little more of a visual context. So here we go.
The problems are huge, and it's not just pollution, but it's ecological and climate destabilization, toxic waste, landfill, our waste stream, deforestation, desertification, and that's just the beginning. Our governments aren't working properly anymore, and it's not just political polarization, but gridlock. Decisions are occurring way too slow for the need of our countries and the world with our advanced and fast-paced society. Simply stated, our old systems of national and or global decision-making are unable to tackle the biggest 21st century problems. Our economies must be stabilized, and it's not just unemployment and outsourcing. This is not like other recessions. Corporations are having record profits. This is just the beginning of an unstoppable phenomenon of technological unemployment. The problems are immense and they just keep going and going. The solutions are here. Our current system can't deal with today's problems, but we can make it work if we think out of the box and create a comprehensive.
So as you can see there, we have a lot of problems. And the thing that we're trying to get across as best as possible with the Unity network is that, one, these problems are very solvable. And 2, that we can simplify them and really see the core of the problems and see how they're all interrelated. Because, the way that we see it is that it's not all these separate fragments of problems that are all over the world and we're complete chaos and we have no idea what to do and there's no way to do it. Instead, we're seeing it as like a root system where all of these problems are interconnected and there are clear and simple solutions that can be enacted. So let's go down and kind of boil it down a little bit further and narrow it down to the essential categories. Like we're going to basically go down to 3 essential categories of what the core problems are. So one would be the failing politico-economic systems at all levels. This would basically, connect the fact that our political systems are very entrenched in our economic well-being and vice versa. And it's just important to note that all those are kind of interconnected. Obviously, the failing ecological and natural systems at all levels of the planet is obviously a essential problem, umbrella problem. And then individuals and families not being able to meet their basic needs. So that's happening everywhere. So I think this is it's important that pretty much every other issue and problem can fit under one of these three categories. And obviously each issue and each problem has its own set of circumstances that is extremely important. But we just don't have time to go into all the details in every single issue, and detail does need its own space. But anyways, let's just jump into here and start addressing some of these more detail. So if we think about the failing politico-economic systems at all levels, there's the two main parts of this. One is the economic destabilization from technological unemployment, wealth stratification. One of the things I want to try to get into here briefly, of course, is why do the 1% own everything, or really the 0.0001%, and why do they begin to control everything, including our political systems and processes? And because our political systems are based on economic systems where people who have money have a better ability to interact with our political systems, we're seeing that effect. So let's start with this graph, which basically talks about how much richer the 1% is getting over a 20 or 30 year period. And we're going to see that 90% of the growth of the society's entire wealth is going to the top 1%. This is a huge problem. And the key to understanding this is that it's not some sort of wild phenomena. I mean, if you look at this graph again, right, we're talking about 1980s, right? What happened in the 1970s that revolutionized how the entire matrix of wealth is distributed across the world? And the answer is very simple. Computers, right? So what's happening at this point in time is that computers and technology, right, is being implemented in massive quantities. And this is basically cutting down the need for workers on every single type of working condition and instituting cybernized automated systems of production to create increased production, increased sales, and simultaneously reducing workforces and reducing labor costs and reducing wages, right? And so what this means is that, for whatever reason, the 1% happens to own all the computers being produced, right? And because of that, they are getting all of the wealth that is coming out of this mass production, right? And it's not necessarily their fault that this is happening. This is just how it was all set up. And, we need to be able to fix that problem and quickly, hopefully. So, because it's going to affect everybody, including the 1%, because if they just keep taking everything and all the jobs disappear, there won't be any wealth left for anyone to buy anything, and so the whole system comes crashing down. So let's look at this next graph here. You can see here, over this time, this percentage of wealth from the top 1%, in the bottom 1% has basically directly mirrored itself. The wealth of the bottom 80% is basically being flipped into the wealth of the 1%. In other words, the 1%, and really we're not talking about the 1%, we're talking about the 0.00001%, are taking everybody else's wealth. And the rest of us are allowing it to happen. So it's not necessarily their fault if we allow it to happen, because it's our wealth, right? So as soon as we decide to put our foot down and be like, hey, the people of the world don't want this to happen anymore, it will stop. It's really that simple. So that's why it's really about unification and all of us coming together and being like, okay, enough is enough. We want our wealth back. So that's kind of the, some of the issues of the 1% stratification thing. And obviously it's barely the tip of the iceberg. So let's go on to more of the tip of the iceberg. Dysfunctional governments that are too slow for the needs of 21st century people. When we're talking about massive political gridlock, we're talking about, so much money in our government systems that you just have this huge corruption where normal everyday people and poor people are not being properly represented in our government systems, from local all the way to global systems. And we can have a graph here, the corporate money in the politics. This is just for the US, but you can see here, all these different 501c4s are just massively increasing the amount of money that they're using, the amount of money in politics, specifically for since Citizens United, and laxing the laws on rich people using their money in politics. And we're going towards multi-billions of dollars for presidential races, and even just to begin Congress. I mean, we're talking about multi-million-dollar congressional races. This is insane. It's completely targeted for people who have money to influence politics, and people who don't have money are just out of luck. There's definitely other really cool graphs that can be shown here, but we'll just stick with those to keep it simple. But the key here is to understand that our systems of government are functioning extremely slowly. We're still in a 200-year-old democratic system, and it needs to be sped up. It needs to be accountable to all people who can be directly involved in the decision-making processes, and to really think about separating the economic systems from the political systems, et cetera, et cetera. So we're just going, kind of hitting the tips of the iceberg on some of these problems. So we'll just keep going into the ecological and failing ecological and natural systems at all levels. So climate destabilization from greenhouse gas emissions and other particulate pollution. So this particular problem is one of the biggest ones that's all over the media. Greenhouse gas emissions, climate change, all that stuff, right? So the easiest way for me to kind of put it into context is that there's a lot of media hoopla going on here, and it's not bad or it's not good or whatever, but I'm going to try to break it down a little bit. Climate change is real. Climate change happens all the time. Climate change is a big arching thing that happens over very long periods of time, literally thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years. Okay, so that's nothing to be concerned about. What we are currently experiencing is what is called climate destabilization. That is when our global climate really is destabilizing for some reason, right? And it doesn't really matter what the reason is, but what we are seeing right now is increased storms, increased droughts, increased colder weather, increased hotter weather, and it's all happening at once in all different places at all different times, right? And all at the same time. So it's basically just increased destabilization. We don't know what's going on with the weather. We don't know what's going on with our climate, both in the oceans and in the atmosphere, and it's concerning, and it should be concerning, right? So what is the cause of this climate destabilization? There is a whole plethora of possible and interconnected reasons for this. One is obviously global warming, right? The greenhouse effect, putting specifically carbon dioxide, methane, sulfur dioxide, other types of inert gases in the air, in the atmosphere, that interact with the sun's rays to increase the temperature of both the oceans and the land. So that's one thing going on. The other one is global dimming. Global dimming is a little more complicated and you hear about it less, but basically you have particulate pollution that isn't actually inert gases, but they're little dust particles from, for example, when you burn gas, there's like a little bit of smoke that comes out, and then when you're burning diesel fuels, it's a little bit more particulate matter in diesel fuel that you can see when it's burning. Additionally, we have a massive amount of planes in the atmosphere, especially the high atmosphere. Some people call them chemtrails, whatever, but you have this massive expanse of cloud-like substances that are covering vast distances in the upper atmosphere. So all of these things are adding to what's called global dimming. And the interesting thing about global warming and global dimming is that they actually counter-affect each other. So global warming can be increasing the temperature of our planet, while global dimming can be simultaneously decreasing the temperature of the planet, because the cover of particulates can actually reduce the heat coming into the atmosphere as much as 25%, if not more. So with that said, let's look at a graph. Let's see what we got here. So this is the problem right here. We are at 2010, or getting close to 2016, right? 2015. And from this point on, right, we have already increased our temperatures by as much as 1%, right? And why that's happened, it doesn't really matter. That's just the facts. That's what we know, okay? What does that mean in the context of temperature increasing? So if the temperature on average is increasing, right, let's look at it in the context of Earth being an organism. Earth is an organism. It's a naturally flowing fluid ocean and land interconnected, mass of biological organizing. Okay, so in that context, if you look at our own bodies as an example, if our temperature goes from 95.5 degrees to 96 or even 97 degrees, we get a fever and we become sick, right? It's really that simple. If the Earth's temperature goes up even a single degree on average, right? And remember, our bodies have a whole plethora of temperatures. From our fingers have very different temperature, from our core, from our hearts have very different temperature, from our mouth have different temperature, from all different parts of our bodies can have different temperature at the same time. But our average temperature, and the one that we look at for whether we're going have a fever or not, right, is all that matters in that context. So if the Earth has a fever, if even just 1 or 2 degrees, it is sick and it will have to compensate for those problems, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So the question is, how sick can the Earth get, right? So in this graph, we can see, could it be a degree and a half? Could it be 2 degrees? Could it be 4, even 5 degrees, right? The most important thing to think about in this graph is this is in our lifetimes. This is in our lifetimes, okay? Our lifetimes don't matter. In the context of our children, our children's children, our grandchildren, and the future generations of this planet, we need to be thinking, 500 years, 1,000 years into the future, and this is the problem, is that we're not even thinking about that. The problem is that we could be experiencing a change in temperatures as much as 10%, sea level rises of, dozens of meters across the world. We're talking about half the species within 500 years, 1,000 years, half the species of our planet going extinct. More than half, if not 75% of all humans, dying, right? Of our children, not being able to meet their needs if it runs out of control, right? And we don't know if that's going to happen. We have no idea if it's going to happen. But what we can think about is that, what is the probability, right? So for me, it's like the science doesn't really matter, okay? The science is complicated. It's hard to show and prove in a simple graph, right? But even if there was a 5% probability, even if there was a 2% probability, even if it's a 1% probability, right? And scientists say there's a much, much higher probability than that, right? That half the species could die, that 75% of the planet's population could die, that our children and children's children their resources can be completely depleted to be able to meet their own needs. That is more than enough to cause concern. And it doesn't matter whatsoever why or who is causing the sickness of the planet to be getting this fever. It's a problem and it needs to be solved and it needs to be dealt with and corrected, and that's what we want to do. And that particular problem is not separate from all the other problems. So let's go on to the next issue, which I think is actually more important than climate change and the whole global warming phenomenon, because this next issue is much, much easier and simpler to digest and understand. And that is the destruction in the land pollution of 70% of the ecological land ecosystems and 30% of the ocean systems, if not 50 or more percent. Massive species die-offs in the range of 10,000 extinct species per year, ... So let's check out this graph. Basically, we just talked about, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, methane, all these greenhouse gases are going up, 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 right? So that's all simple. But in addition to that, we have the nitrogen in the coastal zones, in these death zones all over the planet. And we'll show you a map of that. I believe I have it. The marine fish capture, we've only been measuring it since 1950, but it's just, skyrocketing. And we're destroying our land, and our whole biosphere degradation is just off the charts. So that is all real, okay? There's no question about that. There's no science that needs to be proven. We are completely destroying our planet, right? there are only two naturally unfragmented terrestrial ecosystems left on the planet, right? And that is the Amazon and the Congo. And we're going to look at here the original, the light green is the original forest of the world from 10,000 years ago, before industrialization. And then the dark green is what's left today, right? So, basically North America has completely annihilated all of its normal everyday place, and all that's left is like the top 30, 80 bits of Siberia, okay? It's cold up there. We're doing oil drilling, we're doing foresting, we're doing a lot of stuff like that, but, those forests are probably going to be okay for the time being, but they're really insignificant compared to actual forests that we use as humans, right? So the Amazon obviously is the largest component of what's left, and over here we have a little bit of the Congo, and there's a little tiny bit on these islands here. But you can see that basically 90%, if not 95% of the terrestrial forest systems of our planet have been completely deforested and have completely been annihilated on an old growth level. This is a original forest, right? What does that mean to climate change? It if we just plant trees and reforest all of these forests, right, and allow them to grow for 1,000 years, that could be the difference. That could be all it is. That it's taken a couple hundred years to cut down all the trees, and it could take us 1,000 years to regrow them. These we're talking about forests that were thousands and thousands of years old, and it's going to take thousands of years to regrow them so that they have the right type of biomass to be able to sequester enough carbon. And it can be as simple as that to fix our whole climate systems, at least on the terrestrial level. So we just want to see that is a huge problem, that we're basically destroying all our forests. What's going on inside the actual oceans, right? And basically what we're looking at is we ate all the fish. All the fish are disappearing. And when you see this graph that we're taking about 30% of all fish in the oceans, that's all fish. That's all seafood species. That's all clams. That's everything, right? But in addition to this, we've taken about 90%, at least 80, 90% of the large fish. Okay, so the large fish are already gone, right? And so now we're just catching the small fish. But either way, the idea that our seafood is in the whole ecosystems of the oceans are being depleted completely is extremely scary. We're also looking at an upward trajectory of jellyfish and jellies and bacteria and slime in the oceans. And some people will see, if you live on the coast, you'll see an increase of just kind of this gucky sliminess on top of the ocean in the coast, and also you'll see like in the reeds and in the underground there'd be more black or blue algae growing. It's just a continuized effect from us messing up the entire food chain within the oceans, and so we'll be seeing more of that. If you look at the intertidal zones and the effect of basically the dead zones across the planet, every single red dot basically means that ocean coastal ecosystem is dead. Like that there's no oxygen left in the water because the nitrogen from over agriculturing our land and putting all this extra fertilizer into the ocean basically has a huge algal bloom. You kill off all of the plant all the organisms in that area because all the oxygen is pulled out of the water, and that's what these are. And this is the scary thing is that it's increasing exponentially across the world, and we're going to see more and more and more and more of these dead zones. This is the core of climate destabilization, right? This is the core right here. We are destabilizing our climate, not just because we're burning fossil fuels. I mean, who even knows what's going on with that? Yes, there's a lot of scientific research on that, but the core of it is that we are destroying our environment on every level, right? It's not just the burning of the fuel. It is the destruction of the ecosystems, the completely tear down of our entire forest, 90% of our forests of the world, destroying 90% of all the large fish in the oceans, and the coral reefs, everything, all 90% of all of it's gone, okay? So where is this heading, right? Mass consumption, overpopulation. If we continue on this trajectory, it's just going to keep going, right? This is extinctions where we're looking at towards a map and graph here of going on, tens of thousands of species going extinct per year. Per year. Actually, no, this isn't per year. This is total, I believe. So it's scary and it's exponential and it's just going to keep going up. That's a problem. Our raw materials consumption is insane, right? So it's basically exponentially growing. It doesn't matter what level of or type of resource we're talking about. We're using it all up, and where all these materials and all these resources going that we're taking out of the natural environment, they go into the landfills, they go into the ocean, and they go into the atmosphere. All of them. There is no resource that we take out of the natural environment that doesn't either end up in a landfill, in the ocean, or in the atmosphere. That's where it all goes. It can't go anywhere else. There is nowhere else for it to go. It doesn't just disappear, right? It all goes somewhere. That is a problem. And it shouldn't be too hard to fix these things. I mean, we'll talk some more about the solutions in our solution video, but it's right now we just want to cover the baseline of what the problems are. So again here, the global primary energy consumption, we're using massive amounts of energy. It is good that we're using more natural resource of energy, but overall the consumption is the problem. So lastly, we have individuals and families not being able to meet their own needs, and it's happening all over the world. Basic access to food, water, healthcare, education, homes, all this kind of stuff. So let's see what we're looking at as far as the water shortage. We're talking about 2.6 billion people. Let's just extrapolate up to 3 billion people do not have clean sanitary facilities for their water. This is insane. I mean, that's basically half of the world population. Like, how can we call ourselves humane if half the world's population can't even meet their own basic necessities when we're talking about just basic sanitary water? That's a problem, and it should be fixable. From there, we have financial assistance is just off the charts. Okay, so why are people not being able to meet their own basic life necessities, and they're being more and more reliant on the government or more and more reliant on somebody for their support? So Medicare, Social Security, some of these things are kind of like obvious, but overall, this I believe is just for the United States, but you're seeing an increase on some of these other types of programs, including unemployment and food programs and things like that. And there's no problem with these programs. The programs themselves aren't a problem. The problem is just that why aren't people being able to meet their basic life necessities? Let's continue this poll here. This is just America, but it's very interesting to think about. Access to basic life necessities, and here it talks about it potentially improving. It dropped from 85% to like 80%. So the key thing here is that even in America, in the richest country in the world, we are talking about in the last few years 20%, 1 in 5 people not being able to meet their basic life necessities in the United States, in the richest country in the world. That's insane. Like, how can we even think that that's appropriate? That's okay. That 1/5 of the population is basically just cast aside. I mean, that's a problem. Like, even if 80% say they do have their needs met, I mean, that's not enough. Okay, anyone who thinks that's enough is nuts, especially when we're talking about the United States, right? And from there, the rest of the world, it's like half of the rest of the world can't meet their basic necessities, if not more than half. Okay, so that's concerning, very, very concerning. Crime, prison, we're seeing our political systems go right into our criminal systems. This is just the United States, but you can see here that the population of the United States, you have a very small black population, but in prison, it is the majority. That's crazy. I mean, there's obviously basic injustices going on here that need to be dealt with. In general, just opportunities for everybody is less. The ability to go up the ladder is harder and harder. Getting better and better jobs is harder and harder, even with the recovery. Even though you have record profits for all the corporations, the jobs available are all mainly minimum wage and low paying jobs, and it's just a huge problem. So one thing I want to stress here is it really doesn't matter what socioeconomic class you're in. We all have crippling difficulties meeting our needs, right? The more money you have, the more money you need to borrow, right? The more money you need to get to be able to pay your bills. So you need a better promotion, and it's harder and harder to get those because there's more and more people and there's more and more competition for fewer and fewer jobs. And that's really how it goes. And it's going to get worse and worse and worse. It doesn't matter where you are on the economic spectrum, it is going to get worse and worse and worse. Unless you're at the 0.001%, who is basically taking all the money from everybody else, the rest of us it's just going to get more and more difficult until we change things. So, people need to understand that the money that we do have, the resources that we do have, the time that we do have is extremely valuable, and we need to be sharing it and supporting each other and working together and building these solutions together. So let's just look at this last little graph here. Comfortability. And again, this is just the United States, but just gives you an example when we're talking about what's going on in the richest country in the world. How many people feel comfortable living now, right, with what they have? And this is January 2008, but it's pretty much the same. 70%. That's 30% of the people in the United States don't feel good. And you go to retirement, it's less than half. That is insane. People are scared to retire. People are scared to meet their needs. People are scared about their communities. People are scared about what's going on around them. It's overwhelming on some levels, but I want you to remember that this is just a very glancing view, and I know that there are many, many solutions to these problems that we can fix a lot of this. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take us working together, but I encourage you to watch the solutions video, and also, if you haven't, the introduction to the Unity Network and some of our basic structures that we're building to how to begin the process of prioritizing some of our solutions. So just to reiterate, so I think this is one of the most important things, as just understanding the problems is empowerment, and understanding the way that is empowering for yourself, and understanding them in a way that you try to take away the fear, that these are just problems that exist. They're very, very solvable. We just have to work together and find the right solutions. And I'll remind us that the Unity Network, we're not pushing a specific solution. We're not saying that we know the answer, that we have the answer. We're saying that together we can create the answers, that together all the answers exist. And in the next video, which is the solutions video, we will present a whole plethora of possible solutions. Which ones we want to actually implement is another question. So we'll get into that right now. But thank you for listening. Thank you for being involved, and let's solve all these problems. Okay, take care. Bye.